All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Tellor community call, April 27th, 2021. Yeah, super exciting one today. We have the guys from Liquity here joining us. So we'll kind of be picking their brains, asking them a little bit about Liquity and using Tellor. But first, just some quick announcements. On the dev side, a lot of changes are kind of happening with the mining software. So if you're a miner, stay up to date with that. And we'll be we have a guy relaunching the public pools. So if you're interested in mining Tellor, reach out to Deep Fritz on Discord, and he'll be slowly contacting you guys over the next few weeks. So yeah, that's super exciting. And Mike, I was wondering if you want to say anything about that hackathon.
Sure. Well, the hackathon is ongoing. It kicked off last week. We have a couple conversations going with some teams that are looking to build things on us. One project is looking to build a perpetual. Was it perpetual swaps, Nick? I don't know. I get the terminology mixed up. One of these DeFi
Perpetual
protocol
options.
Options. There we go. Looking to build on us. Additionally, we have separate from the hackathon, we have a panel that we're going to be doing. We're going to be recording it on Monday with the Reimagine conference that's beginning next week. And actually, we're going to have on the panel Robert here from Liquity. He's going to be one of the guests on the panel as well, along with Nick and Steve from a project called Locally Owned that we've mentioned before. And so look forward to that. We'll share that whenever that's ready to be published. And I think that's it. I think, of course, we're really focused on the exciting work we've done with Liquity. They just published a blog about their Oracle mechanism. We're probably going to share that as soon as we can, and we'll probably also compose our own explanation of sort of our role to play in this. And so look forward to that. And I think that about covers it.
Cool. So yeah, I think it's a nice, simple intro. It's obviously an exciting time. ETH is all-time high. Volatility is insane in the space. But it's more fun than ever. But to pass it over to you guys, do you guys like to intro yourselves? And I don't know who to pass it over to, but yeah, feel free to go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to maybe intro myself. So I'm Robert Lauko. I'm the CEO and founder of Liquidity. And yeah, basically, I started this project together with Rick, who's my co-founder, 1.5 years ago. And yeah, we have been building this project since then, and we just went live 3 weeks ago. And I mean, the key idea of Liquidity is to make borrowing more attractive. And by borrowing, I mean collateralized borrowing. So you can basically take out a loan against your Ether and get an interest-free loan. I mean, that's what makes it interesting for many people. And the other thing is that you don't need to maintain a very high collateralization ratio. We try to optimize it to make it more capital efficient. So you only need to keep 110% collateralization for your loan. And that's also where the Oracle is very important for us, because in order to let the system liquidate the loans that fall below this 110 threshold, we need Oracle. So that's how the whole connection to Tellor came about.
Cool. And then we also have Rick and Colton here, just to pass around names since they can see you all. So, for those that kind of aren't as deep into the what is uncollateralized or collateralized borrowing mean, you guys are kind of competitors you would say to DAI, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So, and this is it's always one of those things I like to, how much of your time and everything is focused on making a financial product versus you ultimately have this product, which is LUSD. We've, you start to see, because I think there's almost two different products that Maker has. Like you have, whether it's same with you guys, you have like the CDP and the collateralizing of it, and then you have the people using DAI aspect of it, and they're almost two completely separate people. What I guess what is your guys' strategy, or what's your focus on, and where does kind of using LUSD come in?
Yeah, so I will let Colton maybe also go in.
I can take this one too, if you want. Yeah, cool. So basically, I think one of our big focuses, especially at launch, was focusing on the borrowing aspect of it. So one of the things that Maker tends to do, especially at this point in their life cycle, is like focus on the adoption of DAI itself. But I think we're of the opinion that if you provide a really good borrowing protocol, I mean, people are going to have to find something to do with LUSD anyway, right? They're not just going to like borrow it just for the sake of borrowing it. So by providing the most optimal borrowing experience, we can sort of pursue integrations that end up sort of building out LUSD demand on its own. You don't have to go out and just say, everybody just use LUSD, buy up LUSD, use it for this and this, where you can instead just focus on, look, here's a really good borrowing opportunity. You can deposit your Ether, borrow against it at a really low collateral ratio if you want to. It's interest-free. There's no set duration on the loan. And then from there, you can just choose whatever you want to do with your LUSD. And so we're already starting to see like different integrations happen where people are picking up LUSD. Like our Curve pool is extremely liquid now. We recently launched incentives for it. And then we recently had a Urn Vault launch and a couple other things that are just making the sort of demand for LUSD, like, I don't know, kind of build out on its own without us focusing on the stablecoin aspect too much.
Do you guys want to eventually focus on the stablecoin aspect of it, or is that a no?
Yeah, I mean, we can, but it's just like, it's almost like not a priority at the moment because we have to be able to, market Liquidity's main use case, which is borrowing first before we can just like push LUSD as this, primary vehicle for people to pay their salaries or whatever else.
Cool. Yeah, no, well, I think people actually might just make LUSD even if there is no use case for it, since it's free, right? Like I think that's
exactly.
That's like, what percentage of the people would you say are people that you guys are targeting that want to use LUSD and say like trade around with it versus just want like an ETH hedge?
I would say a majority of users are probably getting leverage, but there's also many who like different types of exposure, like LPing and stuff like that, especially on Curve. Like the minimal impermanent loss aspect of Curve is really interesting for a lot of people who are looking for, I guess, what you could deem like safer yields. But there's also like opportunities to capitalize on the spread of like borrowing LUSD, swapping it to USDC, and then lending out that USDC, for example. And so there's opportunities like that for people to capture as well. And they can sort of reason about their cost more efficiently because they know how much it costs them to borrow the LUSD up front. Whereas I think right now, if you tried to borrow DAI from MakerDAO and then lend it out on Compound, you would actually be yielding like a negative rate. Whereas if you borrowed LUSD and then swapped it for DAI and then lent that DAI out, you would actually make a pretty good profit there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've always wondered, like, who are the people, maybe you guys know, who were these giant whales pulling DAI out at negative rates? Like, it was like beyond me. Like paying these gas costs, like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're the whales, so maybe they know more than we do. But who knows? But it's been interesting to see like how many people just have a lot of ETH and they want to unlock liquidity against that ETH. So without giving up their ETH exposure. I mean, now is like the worst time to give up your ETH exposure. So
right. Cool.
And maybe one thing to add is that our system itself offers like multiple ways to earn yield on top of or in addition to like the amount that you borrow. So it not just makes sense for you to borrow and maybe like make leverage, but also like just leave your LUSD in the system or put it in something we call the stability pool so that you can earn like our secondary token and make a relatively or like benefit from a relatively high APY at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, and I guess my last question before we get into the public's questions, like how did Liquity handle last Friday, I think, right? When the whole market's tanked, was it everything worked great, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it handled it well. So we saw, like, I think it was about 0.2% of total debt liquidated, which is, you know, not too much, and very, very like the system handled it fine. And it was also like profitable for the liquidators directly, and also all the stability pool depositors. So yeah, on all fronts, it did what it should be doing quite nicely.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. I think, like, you know, obviously you guys are going to be like, if we do hit like $10,000 ETH or something like that, like, you guys never have to worry again, do you? It's like...
probably not. And you brought up a good point about like handling liquidations well. I guess it was last week or the week before. Like, we had a lot of people come back into the Discord just to check to make sure we were alive, because it was like, it was our first big test, right? So everybody's like, is this thing going to work like we said it's going to work? And then they came back and they're like, oh, thank God it's still alive and it's still kicking. Yeah. So,
and we only had about 3 troves liquidated, if I remember correctly. So it was almost a bit disappointing not to see like a bigger like test case for our system. But I mean, still the 3 troves were liquidated, I think, in a timely manner.
Was it like one guy complaining on Discord that all his troves got liquidated?
No, we haven't had anybody complain so far about getting liquidated, which is surprising. I mean, and it's really funny because we've recently started thinking about this. Like, the stability pool really democratizes access to these like liquidation auctions, I guess you could say, in a way that's never really been done before. And this, like, almost in a way that's gamified. So you have all of these people who are deposited to the stability pool waiting for liquidations. They're like chomping at the bit because this is the first time they've ever been able to participate in something like that. So anytime ETH starts getting volatile or starts dropping to the downside, everybody's like, oh man, look at this trove. It's probably going to get liquidated if they don't adjust their collateral ratio, blah, blah, blah. So that part of it's been actually, you know, the most fun to watch, just because people are so engaged in that dynamic.
Nice. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for answering my questions.
I have a couple before we jump into the other questions. So you guys mentioned, you know, the things that are attractive to a borrower, like the 0% interest rate and being capital efficient. I know that there's the third thing that's sort of really attractive as well, that is, you know, really important to us as well as a project, is the, you know, being immutable and decentralized aspect of it, and having this sort of like much more of an autonomous protocol than other ones. Could you say more about that, and how are you guys more decentralized than your competitors?
Yeah, so I think there are basically 2 aspects to it. Like, one is the fact that we are indeed like fully immutable. Like, there's nothing anybody could change. There's no admin who could like change parameters. There's also no governance or anybody who could vote on changes. Like, that's aspect number 1. And the second aspect is the fact that we are not running our own front end, but we are incentivizing third parties to operate front end. So we are only providing a launch kit or a front end as a launch kit to whoever wants to deploy and run a front end. So yeah, that makes the whole system even more like censorship resistant. So you cannot just shut down a front end and stop the system from running.
Yeah, I thought the whole front end thing was really, it seemed very innovative to me when I first saw that you guys were doing that. I remember talking with somebody about Uniswap last year or something, and just ways that they could get shut down. And, you know, you run into the issue of people can still censor the way that others can access your protocol. And it was a problem I didn't readily see an answer to. And what you guys are doing, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, and the other side of it is like that Liquity has incentives built into the protocol that reward these front ends, right? So we don't have to rely on people being like altruistic and just being like, oh, you know, I'll spin up a front end for decentralization, because most people don't operate that way. So it was nice to come up with an incentive mechanism that can not only reward users, but also reward front-end operators for contributing to the decentralization of the protocol, especially on the product layer, like you mentioned, where you just have one interface, then, you know, anybody can just censor that interface, or it could crash, or it could, you know, get attacked in some weird way. And then all of the users are at risk, and they have to like go try to use Etherscan or something to, you know, protect themselves or get out. So it's been nice to see that landscape develop, and the incentives, of course, help a lot.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I think like I remember that was a big reason in my mind why like 0x sort of failed. You know, you had the whole relayer model, and then there was really no baked in incentives.
Yeah.
They were supposed to put fees on top, and then that never happened. So
yeah, we had that question a couple of times. It's like, well, how is this going to work whenever, 0x tried it and it didn't work? And the answer was generally like, well, one, the landscape was different back then, right? Like Dexes had not taken off when 0x was trying to do that. So they were fighting a way bigger uphill battle. But two, like you mentioned, the incentive mechanism wasn't fully fleshed out. And so ours was ready to go right out of the gate. And so it was easy to see why there was a lot of benefits to being like the first set of front end operators and bringing in those new users.
Cool.
And yeah. Unlike like, oh, sorry, like 0x, I mean, we don't need a critical mass. Like by just relaying, so to say, like the first stability depositor through your front end, you can already make gains. You don't need to match like orders where you need like a minimum amount of like users. So it's also beneficial.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess on decentralization, I'm guessing you guys have like a V2 in mind, maybe like already, or like, not saying you have to give any details about what V2 would be like, but do you see it sort of being like a Uniswap upgrade where the liquidity would sort of migrate over? Because, like that was always, like when Maker, for instance, switched over to multi-collateral DAI, or you had Uniswap upgrade to V2, like, yeah, you guys were immutable, but literally like once the team said, everybody go to this contract, everybody like hopped up and jumped over to the contract. Would that be, is that a good sign of decentralization, or do you guys eventually want to be where you have no control over the protocol and people just give you the middle finger as former founders or something?
I mean, Robert could probably speak to the V2 thing more than I can, but we don't really have one in mind right now. But like you mentioned, if we decided to launch a V2 or launch something else, yeah, it would have to, there would be this migration process. But I mean, ultimately, like one of the benefits of decentralization that way is if people don't like the V2, they don't have to go there, I guess, if they don't want to, right? They can just use the V1 and stick to it. So it's like a little bit of a gamble to launch a V2 and just hope people migrate. And I mean, Uniswap's kind of proved the model a bit, but it's because they've improved pretty significantly from V1 to V2 and then V3 coming soon. So I think if we ever did do a V2, it'd have to be a pretty substantial improvement, or people might just stay where they are. And I mean, they have the right to choose that, as the contracts can't be touched by us. So,
but that's like the Bitcoin model, right? You just stay where you are forever and
yeah,
reject upgrades.
Yeah, if they want to, then they're free to do that, which is, I mean, it's kind of cool, right? Like, because ultimately that means they don't have to rely on us. If they don't want to go to the V2 and use it, they don't have to, and they could stick to V1. I mean, hopefully if we launched a V2, it'd be improved enough to where people would be like, okay, yeah, this is way better, let's use this. But yeah, I mean, we've learned a lot since launch. So I think if we ever did pursue a V2, it might be way cooler, but there's no telling if we'll actually ever do that.
And it's also just too early to think about the V2, because we need to see how this version like behaves and how it plays out in the wild before even being able to make like substantial improvements.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was like when we launched, we had, ETH was $200 and gas prices were 1 GWay. It's just a, like if we're at $200,000 ETH and gas prices are 1,000 GWay, like it's like, well, we're all done. Like, might as well just go home. But anyway, Mike, you want to kick off the other questions?
Yeah. So some of these are for us, some of these are for Liquity. Let's start off. This one's for us. Your GitHub commits are very, very less compared to Link. Why?
They probably have a way bigger team than us. I don't know. That would probably be.
Or our code is just perfect and we just do one.
Exactly. Good job.
I don't even know if that's actually true. But last time I checked, it was pretty on par. Next one is, if Liquity uses Link and it falls back to Tellor, is this because Link is faster but Tellor is more secure?
You guys want to tackle that one, or you can just say?
Sure. Yeah, it's not to do with security. It's just we wanted like a second layer safety net in our system. because Liquity is completely immutable, as Robert said, and governance free. So we just cannot change it if there's any issues with the primary oracle. So we want the system to be able to make decisions about when to switch oracles based on whether the primary is working or not. Cool. So it's if the primary fails, it will switch to Tellor and get the good price from Tellor instead.
Yeah, right. Hopefully they're both sufficiently secure, so that way it's not like, you know, we're relying on one that's less secure than the other or anything.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe one other thing is also like liveness issues. So it's not only about security, but like temporary failures or breakdowns, so that one oracle could like basically step in if the other fails to deliver some data, not necessarily bad data, but just no data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the bigger risk.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be frozen or broken or you know, something wrong with it. Yeah.
Cool. Next one is when OKX, sir. I have no idea.
Is that one for us?
I don't know.
Maybe.
If it's for us, the answer is I don't know.
Yeah, same
I mean,
for us.
yeah, I think for us, our like primary goal is DeFi integrations as a DeFi protocol. So like constantly pursuing centralized exchanges isn't like, you know, super important. But if it's about you guys, then I'll leave that to you guys. Okay.
Yeah, actually, it could very well be about. So we had our token migration over the last month and a half, and so some of the centralized exchanges that were holding the old token haven't switched over or migrated themselves yet, and we don't have any control over that. So, like we've said, the best thing you guys can do is pester them. All they need to do is, if they have any questions, they can reach out to us directly, like every other exchange did. So hopefully they do that soon.
Yeah, that's the biggest feedback period. When it comes to centralized exchanges, anybody listening, pester the exchange first, because they're the ones who have to make the decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do to get it listed or.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Thank you. Why is Liquidy's circulating supply so low?
I mean, the easy answer is just because of the distribution. I mean, it started being distributed on day one. So there wasn't like a bunch of LQ2Y just floating around or anything like that. So it's just constantly being actively distributed through the stability pool and then through our Uniswap LP incentives and our Curve LP incentives.
Cool. Can you send me token? All right, well, let's move along. What's the difference between Liquity and Chorus?
I'm actually not too familiar with Chorus. If anybody has a TLDR,
sure.
Then...
So we're launching we're trying to do more community currency based pieces. So we have a sort of stable coin method of our own. It's just you have one central issuer. They issue the stable coin. It's obviously uses the Tellor Oracle. There's a day-long withdrawal period or anything, so we're trying to prevent people gaming the Oracle, going in and out. So it's super slow, but there's also inflation baked in. So the stable coin actually loses value over time. So if you have a 10% inflation in there, you mint 10% new tokens every year. And this is actually just so you can use that inflation towards something. So it can go towards a dev fund, or it can go towards planting trees, or
sure.
Actually helping your community. So I think they obviously do not have inflation. Maybe you guys could add inflation, but as of currently, you guys don't have inflation in your system. So
yeah. I mean, that's one of the big differences that, or from what I'm understanding, is that supply and demand is simply measured via just like borrowing demand. But there's also this mechanism we have called a redemption mechanism that allows anybody to redeem LUSD for the underlying collateral at face value. So, you know, whenever LUSD is kind of floating below peg, there's an arbitrage opportunity there for people to redeem LUSD. And then any other time, a lot of the LUSD supply is just managed by, you know, borrow side demand. So there's no I don't know, there's no inflation or anything like that baked in. It's just pure whenever people want to borrow against ETH, they end up minting more LUSD, and then what they do with it from there, I guess, is up to them.
Cool. Yeah, so we'll be working. We're trying to actually work with like real communities, almost on more of like a. We're kind of like the beginning of this topic where they were focused more on the borrowing side, and we actually want people to go and spend it and use it in like the real world. So as we get that going, you know, a lot of the tools will probably be able to be used for LUSD too. So you guys could even support LUSD through a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, so it's almost more like I guess what you'd expect like a traditional stable coin to be, almost like USDC or Tether or whatever, where the main focus is just having this sort of USD-like asset that people can spend and use in their day-to-day lives if they want to, right? Just traditional money.
Is that the purpose of USDC and USDT?
I mean, in an ideal world, I guess. I think they're getting there, you know, more. I know there's a few countries that are starting to make use of USDC and USDT in a way that's not just, you know, leveraging up or like arbitrage or speculation or whatever. So I think while that's not their primary use case, I think it's like slowly getting there, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Is LUSD only valuable if the US regulators crack down on USDC and USDT?
I don't think so. So I don't think that like a crackdown on some stable coins would benefit like our stable coin, rather the opposite, because I think it would destroy confidence. I mean, of course, our stable coin is like designed in a way that it cannot be taken down, but normally the way I see it is that like you can still like cause some negative sentiments if by cracking down on token A, also like for a token B that's like similar in concept.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, that's my point of view. Maybe Colton, you have a different.
I don't think it's different, but I do think that's like a more broad question, right? Because it's more of like an Ethereum ecosystem resiliency question. Like what happens if big government regulators start cracking down on like fundamental pillars of the ecosystem? So if people like, let's say the government starts cracking down on USDT, USDC, or any other stable coins, like how does the Ethereum ecosystem react to that? How do applications react to that? How do centralized exchanges react to that? How do all these custodians react to that? And so it's got much larger knock-on effects than simply just like benefiting us or whatever. But I do think that having a sort of purely decentralized stablecoin does give you some protection in those scenarios if the entire Ethereum ecosystem is also resilient to those scenarios. So in the event that, you know, USDC and USDT can no longer exist, things like DAI and LUSD and empty set dollar and all these other, you know, sort of stablecoin experiments can continue to exist as long as Ethereum continues to exist.
But maybe it's also like a bit like just looking at the current tendencies of the regulator, it doesn't seem to be very likely that the crackdown would only affect like strictly centralized stablecoins. At least the FATF is looking to regulate like DeFi in a way that would almost be a crackdown on any existing DeFi project, like not just stablecoins. And normally like the DeFi projects, they don't have the means to implement like KYC and other restrictions that a centralized exchange or a centralized stablecoin issuer could easily do. So yeah, we will see how that all plays out. It's not like set in stone yet. And I'm sure the market will find some ways to react to it.
Yeah, right. Like it'll all depend on how like DeFi passes the test, right? Like, is it what we think it is or is it not? And hopefully it is what we think it is as far as like decentralization and resiliency go.
Yeah, hear, hear. Good answers. Good question. Next one is, what do you think is better in Tellor compared to the other Oracle networks? What makes Tellor unique? Now, you guys are on a Tellor call, so got to make it sound amazing.
Rick probably has good insight on this.
Oh, yeah. We looked at many different projects actually for the fallback Oracle, and I think Tellor really stood out in terms of decentralization, both for like the way you actually get the price, like the mining process, and also the way you control the protocol. So you have the DAO voting on upgrades and things like that. So and so it's decentralization was the big thing, and the other part of it is kind of the sort of expected longevity of it. So we looked at like using maybe like a DEX or compound open Oracle, but we just couldn't be sure that their interface will be the same, or whether the liquidity will even stay. For example, like with Uniswap, the liquidity can move to the version 3 in like a couple of days, as you mentioned, Nick.
Yeah, it's all going to be gone.
Yeah, so for us, it was that decentralization and kind of expected longevity.
Cool. Next one is, how many Liquidity front end operators are there, and are they profitable?
Oh man, there's a lot actually. Like I want to say like close to 30.
Oh wow.
But yeah, as far as profitability, we actually have a front end leaderboard on our dashboard, or on our Dune Analytics dashboard. And I mean, whether they're profitable or not, I guess, is up to their sort of infrastructure costs, right? Which, I mean, for running a website, depending on the scale of the website, usually isn't like crazy large. But yeah, I mean, many of them have had some pretty good success stories. They've made a pretty decent amount of LQTY, which I'm assuming has been profitable for them, right? Because they can not only earn those LQTY, but they could stake them and earn protocol fees or whatever else they want to do with them. So whether or not they've been profitable, I can't say for sure, but my guess is that, yeah, I mean, at least the top few have probably been profitable, because some have, you know, obviously outperformed others based on like a Pareto distribution, I guess.
Cool.
But what's also interesting is, maybe just to add one more fact to it, is that like we have this kickback rate mechanism where the front ends can decide about what they want to give back to their end user and what amount or fraction they want to keep for themselves. And now the kickback rates, they are like mostly between 99% and 100%. Basically, or the front end only keeps like a tiny fraction of the rewards for itself due to the fierce competition.
Yeah, so like a 99% kickback rate, for example, means the front end just keeps 1% of the rewards. And so we've seen this like race between front ends to almost like a 100% kickback rate just to capture users, because if you reach you know, a certain user threshold, then I mean 1% is still a pretty good deal as far as like rewards earned goes, and especially depending on the size of your you know, user's position in the stability pool.
It's another good example of like hyper capitalism in the space, where like free competition, like profits are instantly zero, like after a week.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, we knew it would be interesting. We didn't know it would be such a quick race to 100%. Like we thought, you know, obviously, I guess in an efficient market, it makes sense that like, you know, front ends with more features can charge like a higher kickback rate, or they could take a larger piece of the pie. Whereas like front ends who are just using the bare bones launch kit or whatever would obviously have to set a kickback rate that's most favorable to the users, because they're not doing anything or much extra. And so it kind of hasn't evolved like that. Like people are they're more worried about capturing users any way they can. And the kickback rate has been like one of the sole mechanisms for doing that, even though many of them are now starting to implement their own design choices, their own features and all of that stuff. So it might even get, you know, more competitive over the next, you know, couple months.
Cool.
Just 4 more. This one's about Chorus. How can Chorus be used on Ethereum?
I mean, it could be. We're not planning on it. Kind of anytime you want a stable coin for actually using things or buying things, like putting it on Ethereum is a really bad choice at the moment. It's just gas costs are too high.
Yeah. Gas is not fun at the moment.
Yeah.
What can we say would be the value of Tellor 5 years from now, talking about future predictions? We have to plead the fifth like normal with these sort of price predictions. We can't, you know, what's the point of us speculating on 5 years from now?
Just let the animal spirits decide on their own.
Yes, exactly.
Look, you think you're really good at that? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about the friendships we've made along the way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about all the free T-shirts that I've gotten over the years and in my dresser. Does crypto need more than one stable coin?
It's a good question. I think we'll be asking ourselves that for like a long time. I think for power users, yes, right? Because some different stablecoins offer different opportunities and different access points. For example, like for some, it's way easier to access USDT than it is to access USDC. For some, it's way easier to use LUSD than, I don't know, like Basis Cash or one of the other, crazy stablecoins. So I think it depends on the use case, but I do think at some level, especially when it comes to just presenting these things to end users, like I guess the normie crowd, I think we might end up getting more like stablecoin aggregators. Like mStable is kind of interesting in that regard, right? And that anybody can sort of deposit the stablecoin of their choice and then get out MUSD, which is like, it represents all of the stable coins within that basket. And normal people might just want to use that if they're just trying to make like USD payments or whatever. So who knows? I mean, I think it's a tough question, but it's pretty obvious that certain stable coins offer certain opportunities to certain people. And as long as that's always the case, then there'll be, a place for different stable coins.
Cool. Actually, this last one is kind of a one we've already done. How does Liquidity protocol plan on using Tellor? You want to just
you got that
quick TLDR?
Yeah, sure. So we have a double oracle system, and Tellor is our secondary oracle. So when the primary oracle, which is Chainlink, if that were to ever freeze, or so if it freezes for more than 4 hours, or if it like outright fails, then we would switch to using Tellor as our primary oracle. And if we did switch, then we'd keep using Tellor until we see that Chainlink is back online and that both oracles are like in sync in terms of price. So if there's only a small 5% difference in price. And we take that as a signal that, okay, now the primary oracle is actually reporting the accurate market price again. And then we'd switch back. So yeah, it's our secondary fallback.
Thank you. Very cool.
I have an extra thing to add on top of this. Maybe like, it would be cool to like, I don't know, maybe expand on what went into some of the like design choices when coming up with the fallback mechanism. Cause it's pretty intricate. Like there's not many protocols, if any at all, that implement something similar to this. So it might be cool to like shed, more light on what went into the design process and thinking behind a lot of the different decisions.
Yeah, maybe I guess like the main like discussion was whether we should only have like a fallback or whether we should use multiple oracles as like equally important data points, so and then get some aggregate value or average. And I think that was like the main direction that we took there, that we finally ended up with only using or only like opting for a fallback mechanism. But Rick can tell more about that.
It really came down to this fact that we're completely immutable, and we needed the system to make the decisions on chain rather than any human input to decide which oracle is valid. So, we had a look at the sort of specific conditions for falling back. And so the Chainlink oracle has like a sort of a minimum or maximum 3 hours before it updates. So we give it 4 hours. And if it hasn't updated by then, we know something's wrong because it's not doing what it's like, expected to do. So then we fall back to Tellor. And yeah, we could sort of decided that like taking an average of different oracles could end up being like the worst of all worlds rather than the best, because it could be, like if one of them is corrupt, then that could drag your price off, or it could mess with the data you get. So yeah, we figured out it's best to just have one primary oracle and use it as long as it's working, and then as soon as we detect any problems, switch to the secondary.
And one more thing, like I know how this works, but just for the call, like how does it make this decision? Like when does it say, or when does it check the oracles? Like when does it make the decision that one's broken and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so every time we need the price in the system, which is basically any time somebody does a borrow operation, if they adjust their trove, or if there's a liquidation, then we check both prices from both oracles, and we'll sort of have these conditions for checking whether each one is valid. So we check whether it's frozen or whether it's broken. Broken being like the response is bad, or it's like an invalid timestamp or something like that. We check that at every operation every operation done by a user in the system. and the system will then like switch between states based on its perceived status of the oracles. So it could actually switch quite quickly if there's like a very sort of quick flash temporary failure in the primary. It could be within minutes that it switches back, but yeah, it depends on how the oracles behave.
Sweet.
And it's also amazing how, or like surprising how complicated and sophisticated the whole like mechanism to switch back and forth between the two oracle or price feeds like ended up. Because I mean, there are so many combinations. I mean, just the fact that we have like 3 different failure modes and 2 oracles, and then there are, I forgot, like 6 or 7 states for the system, and then there are multiple directions like a state could take, like it could go back to a state A or a state B or a state C. So like if you're trying to draw that on paper, it ends up being like a huge diagram, like showing like many states going back and forth. It's really cool to see that.
Thanks for that. Yeah, you know, it was really cool to find you guys as a project and to hear about your Oracle mechanism and how you were planning on having the fallback mechanism. This is something that Nick and us as a team have been sort of preaching as part of the Oracle best practices for a while now. You know, having fallbacks and things like that, and it was really refreshing to see a team take it so seriously and have such a robust amount of thought put into the protocol, and we're really happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, I mean, for us, it was just like especially important, right? Because a lot of people, like, if something goes wrong with the Oracle, you kind of have governance to protect the protocol, right? Like, governance can step in and just save it. Whereas for us, like, if we only have one Oracle and it breaks, it's not good.
Nope.
And what's also very cool about the Tellor Oracle is that you can at least do something about it. If we need to fall back and then let's say the price isn't like up to date because there haven't been enough tips yet for the Ether USD price feed, then we can do something about it, or we can even try to detect like an outage even before our system would fall back to it, so that we can pre-fund, or we or whoever, like our users mainly, or the liquidators who need to rely on a price feed, they could also make sure and that like we have like an up-to-date Tellor price, which is quite cool. So you're not just like subject to whatever happens, but you can influence it.
Yeah,
awesome.
Glad to know our miners can be paid. So
yeah,
you respond well. But no, this was a great call, guys. It was really fun learning about your protocol and getting a chance to chat with you guys. So, any questions you guys have for us, or any last words? Nope. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for watching, and yeah, see you later.
Until next time.
Congrats, guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.